Hi, folks. I want to welcome you back to another one of these stories of the rails or tales of the rails. What do you want to call them? I'm not sure. I haven't set a name just yet for what I want to call this series of videos. But again, I'd like to welcome you in. Hope you're enjoying these. Today, I'd like to share a tale of a legendary engineer that through a tragic train crash, he became a folk hero. His life was cut short at the age of 37 years old, and had numerous songs written throughout history, including such great artists as Johnny Cash and the Grateful Dead. So gather around, folks, for I want to tell you a story. It's a story of a legendary engineer, and his name is Casey Jones. And there's never been a man who could drive a train as fast or as well. People say that Casey Jones could drive a train before he could walk. And when he was a baby, he said choo-choo instead of goo-goo. When Casey was a young man growing up in Kentucky, the railroad was the fastest way of getting around. This was back before the days of airplanes. There were no cars or trucks. There were only horse-drawn vehicles and the mighty iron horse, as it was called, the locomotive. Casey was an engineer for the Illinois Central Railroad. He loved to sit way up in the cabin of the train with one hand on the whistle and one hand on the brake. When the tracks were straight and clear, Casey would pull the throttle and the train would take off like a rocket shooting into space. When he came into the station, he would pull the brake and bring the train to a sudden stop. Casey loved to watch the trees and fields go whizzing by as he zoomed through the countryside. He'd love to make the train's whistle blow, and there was no other engineer who could blow the whistle quite the way Casey did. Casey's whistle started out soft like a whippoorwill, then rose to a howl like a coyote crying in the night. Finally it faded away to a quiet whisper. People in town always knew when Casey was coming. Even before they could see the train, they could hear it. They'd hear the powerful chugga-chugga, chugga-chugga getting louder and louder. Then they'd hear that wild whistle sound. Some said that Casey's whistle had magic powers. They said that when Casey blew his whistle, little babies would wake up from their naps, but they wouldn't cry. Instead, they'd make little chugga-chugga woo-woo sounds, then fall right back to sleep. When Casey blew his whistle, the cows would give an extra quart of milk, and the chickens would lay at least a dozen eggs each. And as the story goes, if you cracked one of those eggs in a cold frying pan and put out a piece of plain bread, just as soon as Casey went blazing by, there in that pan would be a nicely fried egg, over easy, and on the side, a plate of hot buttered toast. Now the reason Casey drove so fast was simple. He took great pride in always being on time. Casey wanted to make sure that he got that train to where it was going when it was supposed to be there, no matter what. Whenever he started out on a run, the railroad men would always wave and yell, "Bring her in on time, Casey," and they knew he would. But Casey couldn't make that train go fast with his good looks. No, sir. Casey needed a good fireman to help him, and he had one of the best, in Sam Webb. The fireman on the train didn't put out fires like you might think. The fireman's job was to keep the fire in the engine burning by shoveling coal into it. When the flames were roaring, that made a lot of steam, and that made the train go fast. No doubt about it, Sam Webb was a first-rate fireman. He could shovel coal faster than anyone on either side of the Mississippi. The faster Sim shuffled, the faster Casey could drive the train. Sim Webb kept the fire good and hot, and Casey Jones got their trains in on time. Together, they were an unbeatable team. There was only one day that Casey and Sim almost didn't make it to the station on time. They were carrying a load of mail to Memphis, Tennessee, and it was raining cats and dogs. At the station in Memphis, the railroad men waited for Casey to arrive. Some said, "There's no way he can make it in on time with all this rain. He'll have to slow down." But others said, "Just you wait. He'll make it. Casey Jones always makes it on time." And sure enough, just then they saw a light on the tracks up ahead and heard the lonesome whistle that could only be Casey Jones. The train pulled into the station, dripping wet, puffing hard, but right on time. Casey and Sim were dog-tired and more than ready for a good night's sleep, but they were hardly settled in their beds when there was a knock at the door. Word came that the engineer who was supposed to drive the train on the southbound run was sick. Well, they didn't even have to ask Casey if he would take the man's place. Tired as he was, Casey got dressed and headed for the station. And when he got there, he found Sam Webb already stoking the fire with coal, getting the train ready to carry mail, packages of freight, and passengers as well. Now, friends, here's where I have to tell you the sad part of this story, about how Casey met his end. As Casey mounted to the cabin and took the throttle in his hand, he heard someone shout, "Casey, you're already more than an hour and a half late." But Casey just smiled and thought to himself, "I guess that means I'll just have to go a little bit faster." Casey opened up the throttle, and the train plunged into the dark, wet night. Sim Webb shoveled coal with all his might, and the train chugged on, faster and faster. "Casey," Sim yelled, "you're running too fast." But Casey said, "Fireman, don't you fret. Keep knocking at that fire door and don't give up yet. I'm going to run this train until she leaves the rail, or we're going to make it on time with the southbound mail." They drove on. The train gained speed until it was flying faster than the speed of light. Then Casey said, "I believe we'll make it through, for the engine is a-steamin' better than I ever knew." Casey got the signal that the tracks were clear up ahead, so he was highballing down the tracks, pushing that train just as fast as it would go. He was going so fast that it looked like they might even make it on time. Just then, as he squealed around a curve and through the darkness, Casey saw a light up ahead. He knew the light wasn't supposed to be there, not on this track. At that moment, Casey knew there was a broken-down freight train stuck on the track just ahead, and he was speeding straight toward it. Casey pulled the brake as hard as he could and yelled to the partner, "Jump, Sim!" "Casey, you come on," replied Sim. "Jump," Casey shouted, and in the blink of an eye, Sim jumped. But Casey stayed on with the train. He knew that he could not stop the train in time, but he knew he had to slow it down. He knew that if he jumped and let go of the brake, the train would crash into the other train at a dangerously high speed. So Casey pulled on the brake with all his might. A terrible screeching and squealing sound ripped through the darkness. Then came the crash. Poor Casey. When they found him, they said he had one hand still on the brake and one hand tight on the whistle, trying to stop the train as best as he could and to give warning to the other train. Casey Jones did not survive that fateful ride, but he was the only person who died in that crash. Casey's bravery that night saved all the passengers on both trains, and his fireman Sim. After that, thanks to Sim Webb keeping the story alive, people would tell stories about the brave engineer named Casey Jones. Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this story of Casey Jones. If you're ever down in Jackson, Tennessee, you can go and visit the Casey Jones Home and Railroad Museum, where they have the original home of the famous engineer and an 8,000 square foot train museum. I myself have to make it down there someday. Really like to check it out. But anyway, folks, I'd like to thank you all for being here with me today, and I'd like to thank all the new subscribers that have joined my channel. We're only 26 away from that 1K milestone now. All thanks to each and every one of you. So it's such a blessing to have you all here and subscribe to my channel and watching my videos. Until next time, folks, stay safe out there. I love you all, and God bless.